Is out of Revelation 2, verses 8 through 11. And to the angel of the church of Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death.
Welcome to the port of modern-day Izmir, which was known in ancient times as Smyrna. Today, Izmir is the third largest city in Turkey, with approximately 6 million people calling it home. Izmir is a beautiful and busy place, hosting Turkey's second largest port. Even in our modern world, the location of this city makes it a great contributor to Turkey's economy and provides opportunities for business and trading worldwide. But this isn't a new phenomenon. It stretches back throughout history, well before the 1st century. During the 1st century, when Jesus wrote his letter to Christians in Smyrna, it was home to over 100,000 people, and it was a strategically vital part of the Roman rule in this region. Smyrna's significance came down to 3 factors: its location, its influence, and its allegiance to Rome. The Gulf of Smyrna is a natural harbor on the Aegean Sea. This geographic feature made Smyrna's location on the coastline of this harbor ideal for trade and travel, and it quickly became a central hub of commerce in the ancient world. Wherever there's trade, there's money, and Smyrna became a very wealthy city. As travelers from around the world journeyed to Smyrna with their goods, they brought their culture and religion with them. And so the city became a melting pot situated on crossroads of the ancient world. The second factor that contributed to its significance was its cultural influence. Smyrna boasted a rich history of poets, authors, and other important citizens. One, for an example, is Homer, the author of 2 influential works, the Odyssey and the Iliad. He was born right here in Smyrna. The third reason for Smyrna's importance was the fact that it was known for being very faithful to Rome. In fact, it was one of the first cities in Asia Minor to construct a temple to worship the Emperor Caesar. Because of that faithfulness, they were not hindered by the Roman Empire, and they were left to live their luxurious life that their wealth afforded.
There are a few major background pieces of information that will help us better understand Jesus' letter to the believers here in Smyrna. The first piece of information is found here, inside the agora, or the marketplace at Smyrna. Around this agora are various inscriptions etched into the marble and the granite columns. These engraved words were essentially opportunities to give rewards or brag about accomplishments of wealthy people or politicians or religious leaders, or to celebrate the building of an impressive building. And this was just one of the ways to publicly praise or reward citizens at this time. Another means of rewarding people was the giving of laurel crowns. People could earn a crown for their conquest in battle, or their athletic prowess in the games, or for their strength in the gladiatorial rings. And the imagery of receiving a crown as a reward would have been really familiar to the people of Smyrna. But the value of the crown was not in the object itself, because they were typically just a simple floral arrangement. The value was found in the accomplishment of an impressive feat and in the prestige of the person who rewarded them with the crown. But the average person, they would have never expected to receive a crown. Crowns were for elite athletes or war heroes. If you were a common person, it just wasn't going to happen. And with this cultural reality in mind, Jesus wrote to the believers in Smyrna. But we will see that his approach to answering the question, who should receive a crown, stood in sharp contrast to the rest of the culture.
A second piece of background information is that Smyrna was the first city in Asia Minor to build a temple to the Roman goddess Roma. In order to show their allegiance to Rome, they built this temple in 195 BC. About 200 years later, in the 1st century AD, Smyrna became a center of the emperor worship, having won the privilege from the Roman Senate by building the first temple in honor of Tiberius. Under Domitian, the emperor at the time of the writings of Revelation, emperor worship became compulsory for every Roman citizen on the threat of death. Once a year, a citizen had to burn incense on the altar to Caesar, after which he was issued a certificate. Now, obviously, this caused great turmoil for the Christ follower in the city. Smyrna was a city brimming with national pride, influence, and strong connections to the leaders of the largest empire in the world. And there, in this city, was a band of Christians living out their faith and attempting to stand for what they believed God was calling them to stand for. The results in their lives every single day were catastrophic. In fact, just 60 years after this letter was written by Jesus to this church, one of the Apostle John's disciples, Polycarp, was burned to death at the stake for the amusement of the people of Smyrna. His crime? Refusing to declare that Caesar is Lord. Yet Jesus writes this letter to them with words of encouragement, words of perseverance, words that would give this suffering church the strength they needed to endure.
There's so much packaged into the history of what we're looking at that it's easy for us who don't have access to it to miss it, to miss some of the significance. And we're going to see as we go through our portion of Scripture today during our discussion time together that it ties in directly to some of those points that you just heard. If you don't know me, I'm Pastor Brad, and sorry that the first thing you heard from me was stuff about money, because that's not what we really want to go for. But I want you to know that we're glad that you're here joining us in person or online. That is exciting that you're here. We are in a series. We're in a series this morning called 7. And we are looking at the 7 churches that get letters as recorded in the beginning of the book of Revelation. And what we did was we took some time where we outlined for ourselves last week what kind of was going on. And we looked at the beginning of the book of Revelation. We looked at chapter 1. And in chapter 1, we said right away, it says, we're talking about the revelation of Jesus Christ, both that it's about him and that it's from him, but it's this idea of it's a revelation. That the Greek word here, the language the Bible is written in, and I don't know if you were paying close attention to that video we just showed. Did you see those inscriptions? Did you see those funky shapes that were all in lines, like in columns, and looked almost like a kind of a pictograph? That's Greek. That's the original Greek that we have. That's what we have to try to dig through to get to these original meanings. And this one here, this word is apocalypsis, which is where we get our English word apocalypse. So we talked about the fact that the apocalypse here, what it was talking about was not what we might think of as apocalypse as the end of all things, like this cataclysmic event where zombies take over the world when all the people die, right? No, this is the idea of the unveiling, the uncovering of what was hidden, of what was, what is, and what is to come. And we see that as we read through here, as we keep going, we read that it's his account. But if you look at verse 17, I wanted to bring this up this week. This is the Apostle John, who is receiving this revelation from Jesus, and he's sharing this vision that he had. And he says, this is John speaking, verse 17, when John saw Jesus. Now, do you remember who John was? Those of you who have been around the Bible before? He was described in a unique way amongst the original 12 disciples of Jesus. Do you know what nickname he had? The disciple Jesus loved. Can you imagine that? That'd be like, me describing my kids. I've got Jonah, I've got Judah, and I've got Josiah, the one I love. You know what I mean? It's like, that would be terrible. But what we know is that there was a special, unique relationship between John and Jesus. They were tight. And yet it says here, with that relationship, this is how he knew Jesus when he walked with him in the flesh. When I, John, saw him, Jesus, I fell at his feet as though dead. Can you imagine that? You're sitting in a room and your best friend walks in the door. Is your response going to be to fall flat on your face, almost like you were dead? My guess is not, okay? Unless your best friend had died, had come back to life, and was now revealed in the fullness of his glory and splendor as the eternal second person of the Trinity, of the Godhead, of the creator of all things. That's why John responds like this, even to this one who was his best friend. When this happens, boom, the glory of God revealed, and he is just floored by it. But look what Jesus does. Says he laid his right hand on me and saying, Fear not. Do you know that is the most often quoted command in all of Scripture? Of all the things we're supposed to do, those two words, fear not. The Bible says that more than anything else. Because of our connection to the one who made it all, who owns it all, who upholds it all, we can fear not no matter what's going on. And you'll see how that plays into even what we read later today for the church that we have, for the reading we already had. He says, I am the first and the last and the living one. I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Jesus is explaining, this is who I am, the glory of who I am. And in light of that, he says, verse 19, write, therefore, the things that you have seen, those that are, and those that are about to take place after this. See, John is supposed to put this out here. It's what we said about this book of Revelation. It's not just this easy thing that happened back then and it's done, or that happened in the past for John. There was historical pieces to it, there were present pieces, and there were future pieces, and that is true for us today. And then we said what we're looking at are chapters 2 and 3 in this book of Revelation, the last book of our Bible. We said that that these two chapters, chapters 2 and chapters 3, are composed of 7 unique letters to 7 unique churches. And we said that these letters each had a pattern. Now, they don't all follow it exactly scientifically, but the basic idea is there's a hello, there's an introduction of stuff, then there's either commendation and criticism, or just commendation or just criticism, but then there's always, after Jesus is saying, here's what's going on, he says, here's what I want for you. Here's what you need to do in light of what's going on. And then he wraps things up with a hope and a promise for the future. That's the pattern of what we walk through with each of these 7 short letters. And then we talked about the fact that the very churches that were written to found themselves, they were actually part of a first century mail route. So it made sense that these churches were picked and that these churches were listed in the order that they were listed in. And we started last week with Ephesus. Does anybody remember the critique that Ephesus had? It's the idea that there was a loss of a first love, that passion that first accompanied what it meant to know who Jesus was. And there's a calling and a imploring to get back to that first love, to that which motivated and built that fire in your belly and under your feet to get you moving. Jesus is saying, you're doing some good stuff, but you've lost the heart. And then after that, now we find ourselves this week traveling to Smyrna. And that's where you got the introduction today. This was the city in which the church that Jesus is writing to lived, this place where there was this emperor worship, this place that had been destroyed and then rebuilt. Those who thought that they were the most prominent in the area because they were the first to compose this temple for emperor worship. This is the place where these Christians are at, where we heard the words that Matthew read for us this morning. Thank you, Matthew, for reading. I appreciated that. So here's where we're at. We're at Smyrna. And what we talked about, again, in just summary of last week, Revelation, it's the story of Jesus. It's from him. It's about him. It's a story of what was, what is, and what is to come. And that's made clear in the text. But we said it's also very much, it tells the story of who we're supposed to be too, as individuals and as a church family. He's writing to churches here. These are who these letters are addressed to. Now, the churches are made up of individuals, so clearly if the church is supposed to be it, the individuals are, but this is the idea as a community coming together. Here's what Jesus expects of those who would follow him. And it's not this expectation of a slave owner with this chattel slave cracking a whip and saying, thou shalt do it because I'm the boss and you better. It's the gentle, encouraging, maybe excited, maybe a little frustrated voice of a father telling his kids, here's where we're headed, and it's good. I want you to come along. I want you to enjoy all that you were made for. That's what we're looking at. So what we're going to do is we're going to dissect a little bit what Matthew already read for us. So if you've got your Bibles, and first of all, if you don't have a Bible, if there's no Bible that you have at home, you didn't come with a Bible, you should see in the seats in front of you, we've got some Bibles. That is our gift to you. Go ahead, take it, write your name in the front, bring it back. When you come back, keep it at home while you're at home. Use it. We want you to have it. That's our gift to you. But you can also open the Bibles you brought with you, your apps on your smart devices. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at Revelation chapter 2 and start here in verse 8. And what we read is the words of Jesus to this church. It says, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. Now, for us, we might read that and we might do, maybe not consciously, but almost subconsciously, oh, okay, Jesus, yeah. Yeah, he's God. He was first and last. Yeah, he died and came to life. Yeah, I know that stuff, right? That's the Jesus-y stuff. But this is written to the people who are in Smyrna, whose city, the city's identity held themselves to be the first and the last of the cities of Rome. They were the primary. They were the champions. They were there first, and they will endure to the end. And how do they know that? Because they had died in an earthquake. I forget the dating, but I think it was like 100 or so years ahead of time. Earthquake had completely leveled the city. And they prided themselves that they had worked hard and rebuilt themselves to this place of prestige and honor, that they were dead as a city and they were alive now. This is what Smyrna prided itself on. And Jesus steps in his letter and says, though you live in the place that claims this, I am the one who has done this. I am the one who extols this by my very existence. It's richer and deeper when we understand that Jesus is speaking very specifically. He knows what's going on. He sees what's going on for these Smyrnian Christians. And he says that, verse 9, I know your tribulation. This is the word thlipsis. Anyone want to try and say that one? Thlipsis. If the person in front of you, if the back of their head isn't wet, you didn't say it right. Okay? Thlipsis. All right, I think I can wipe my screen off here. I've said it 3 times. And we're going to get back to this word in a minute because we see it again in the next verse we get to. But you have to understand, this is the word at its root kind of is this idea of being pressed and squished together, a crushing of 2 things together almost to form a whole nother substance. It's not just well, I kind of had a rough day. It is a crushing. It's a word of crushing. Because he knows that's what's going on. Jesus is aware of what's going on in the lives of the people that he loves. But then he goes on, he says, and I know your poverty. The interesting thing is he says, I know your poverty, which they were, because if you remember, in Smyrna, it was an emperor worship hub. And so for you to be a productive part of the community, you had to worship the emperor. So if you weren't willing to worship the emperor, all your business ventures, everything that you would be trying to do to make a living, whether it was sewing tents or herding cattle or making pottery, no matter what it would be hindered if you were not being willing to worship the emperor and say that Caesar is Lord. So they are in a place of poverty, and yet he says they are rich. See, there is a richness in some poverty that is more glorious than all the opulence that some people experience in this life today because they're actually truly poor in their souls. And this is what Jesus offers to us. Jesus is saying, I see it. I know the world might be looking at you and, those dirty Christians, those dirty Jesus people. Oh, they're so disgusting. They won't even worship Caesar. That's what they were saying. They were being scoffed at. And Jesus says, I see you. I know. The Bible tells us that we are not, in the book of Hebrews, that we are not without a high priest who can be sympathetic to us, that Jesus knows everything we've been through. He's experienced it, and he's with us in it. He sees us in it. And the interesting thing that we'll get to when we get to our 7th church is here in the second church, the letter to the second church, we see that there is poverty, and yet these people are still rich. In letter 7, we see that there are rich Christians who are truly poor. It's a really interesting reversal. We'll get more to that. See, I'm hooking you for later. You got to stick around all the way to church number 7 to get that. But then he goes, and I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. You know what that word slander is? You'll probably recognize it when I say it. Oh, there we go. Who said it? Nice job, Katina. It's blasphemia, where we get our word blaspheme. It is this idea of saying something that is so untrue that you can be condemned for it. It is just utterly evil to say this. This is what's happening to the Christians at Smyrna, to those who are trying to follow after Jesus. They are having these horrible, terrible things hurled at them. And then we see here that it's all the work of this person, Satan, of those who are under the sway of Satan. This is Satanus. It means adversary, one who fights against, that they are in real opposition. They are in real suffering. And it begs a question that we got to ask. You know what question that is? Why do we suffer? I will not, in the next 2 minutes, be able to answer the question of why is there suffering in this world. For thousands and thousands of years, people way smarter than me have been wrestling with this idea. But I have a few things I wanted to throw your way. A few things for us to think through and just be aware of. And the first one, and this is not a cop-out answer, it is a very real answer, and that's the fact that we live in a world that is broken by sin. Things do not work out the way they're supposed to because sin has broken everything to one degree or another. From creation itself, to individuals, to people, to animals, to the environment. Everything has brokenness attached to it, so things don't work the way they're supposed to. Have you ever been riding your bike just down the road, and you happen to hit a stone in the road? Do you know what happens? Let me tell you nothing good. And if you're as graceful as I am, you bear marks for the rest of your life from those instances, right? Now, the stone shouldn't have been there, right? The issue was the stone was where it wasn't supposed to be, and it threw everything else off. Sin is like that, and that's not a full enough, a rich enough analogy for it, but it's a piece to give you an idea that there are stones in the gears of this world and this universe that throws things off. And so there's a level that's going to be expected. I want to say that sometimes suffering exists to awaken our need, to awaken our awareness to a deeper need or a deeper issue. Do you know that there are people in life who do not have the ability to experience pain physically? Meaning that there's actually a disorder where those receptors don't work. So they could go ahead and lean on a hot stove, a hot oven, and have no idea that they were burning their hand, okay? And you might think, that would be awesome. I could stub my toe and it wouldn't bother me at all. When my brother punches me in the face, I could just punch him back because it wouldn't bother me, right? But the problem is, doctors say that it's one of the most dangerous disorders that you can possibly have. It's actually what made leprosy, especially during the time of the Bible, so dangerous. It wasn't that your skin would fall off and do all these things. What actually happened with leprosy was that those lepers lost the ability to feel in their extremities. And then when they would get a sore or a cut, and animals and bugs would come and start eating those things while they were asleep, they couldn't feel it. And they would die from that. It was the lack of feeling that killed them. We need to feel sometimes because there's deeper things at play. And without that suffering, we wouldn't be aware of it. And sometimes, and now, please do not hear, I am not saying this is a majority or that I'm saying anything to anyone's specific situation right now, but sometimes there's things that need to be adjusted. And we're suffering because of decisions we've made. Sometimes we're suffering because of decisions like point one that I made about sin in the world, decisions that other people made. That's not your fault. And let me tell you this, shame is always a terrible response to suffering. If you're in a tough place right now and you're feeling shame, understand the tongue-in-cheek way I'm saying this, knock it off, okay? Don't do that. Don't let shame rule your life. Yes, sometimes there's right to feel conviction or even maybe kind of a godly guilt if you're suffering and it's because of a bunch of decisions you've been making that aren't good. Sure, but take that to do correction. Don't take that to be a place of just letting yourself be beat down and worn down. If you're suffering, cry out to Jesus. If you haven't ever done that in your life, let me tell you, that is where real help, real hope, and real healing is found. Because we are not left, the Bible tells us, with a Savior who is unsympathetic, who does not understand. We are left with a God who went to every extreme to right every wrong that was ever done so that we could have eternity made perfect with him and all of his creation. That's what we're called to. So why do we suffer? Well, sin broke the world. And sin broke the world because, well, we brought sin into the world. So we have to wrestle with and deal with that. But as we'll get to at the end, that doesn't mean that we get to kind of just write it off. Well, that's sin's fault, and I'm free. But we'll get back to that. Let's just plow through the last part of this letter to the Smyrna church. He says this again. Look at this oft-commanded command. Do not what? Fear. Say it with me. Do not fear. He just got done saying about all their suffering and all their poverty and all the slander that was coming against them. And what does he say? Do not fear. Now, if I were writing this, I'd be like, don't fear, don't be afraid. It's going to be okay. You're going to be all right. You know, this too shall pass, right? Is that what Jesus does? In great encouraging fashion, he writes, do not fear because you're going to suffer. What? That doesn't seem very nice. Here's the thing about Jesus. He is so much in the moment, and he is so real and so honest. He doesn't sugarcoat stuff. And he says, you're going to suffer. It's not right, because you're doing the right things. Because look what he says. Behold, the devil, this time it's diablos, or slanderer. It actually correlates back to that blasphemia word that we talked about before. But the slanderer is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. Nice little side road here, too. This word here, we think, God is testing me to see if that's not really what's going on. You see, this is a hina clause with an aorist passive. Does that make a lot of sense to anybody? Pastor Kim, well, you at least recognize the words, right, Pastor Kim? I do. There we go. This one was one of those deep dives into the Greek stuff for me, and I don't want to overly Bible nerd you, but here's the thing. This is more along the lines of the determination of essential essence is what this word means, rather than just simple testing. Like, can you pass the test? Well, I took my driver's test and I failed. No, it's not that. This is, what are you at your core? This actually could be read or translated rather than that you may be tested as this, but this wouldn't flow as well. With the result that you will have been tested in such a way that the testing demonstrates your essential essence. How does that work for you? Does that make it clearer? No, the whole idea is what this is going to do is this is going to show off who you are. And Jesus has full confidence in them. Just don't fear. Don't fear that you're going to be shown off for who you are, because I know that you are mine. I know that you are faithful. I know that you are strong. This is what Jesus is saying. And he goes on and he says, for 10 days, now is that literally 10 days or figuratively 10 days? We don't know. Okay, so it could be either way. It could have been something that literally happened, or it could have been looking ahead to an area of time. But the whole idea, it was going to happen, and it was going to be more than a brief moment. And it says, for those 10 days, you will have tribulation. This is that word thlipsis. Again, if you want to have fun or you don't like the person in front of you, say that a few more times. But thlipsis, this idea of this crushing down. You know where else? We find this word in several different places. We find this word in a bunch of places, but we find it in John 16. John 16, we read these words of Jesus preparing his disciples for the end that was going to come, for all that he wanted for them, for what he was preparing them for. He says, behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and you will leave me alone. He's predicting their abandonment of him. And he says, yet I'm not alone, for the Father is with me. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, or some translations, trouble. But take heart, because I have overtaken the world. He says that in the world you will have tribulation. That is the same word here. From back during his time was walking with his disciples and preparing them, he's saying trouble will come. That's why you've heard me say before, don't believe the lie that is this. Becoming a Christian is easy. Has anyone ever heard that phrase? Because I know I was told that even growing up. Oh, if you want to be a Christian, don't worry, it's easy. All you have to do is... Now here's the thing. I will die on the hill that following Jesus is simple. It doesn't take complex algorithms. It doesn't take masterful religion. It doesn't take this checklist of do's and don'ts. And now all of a sudden, you finally made yourself worthy to be called a Christian. Following Jesus is as simple as this, recognizing your need for a Savior and saying, Jesus, pay for me, and I will follow you. Now, simple though that may be, hard it is too. It's hard to do the things that are at war with some of our sin, some of our sinful desires from a sinful world around us that's still living in that brokenness. And it's our job to bring help, hope, and healing into those broken spaces, and that's not easy. Do you know something about wounded animals? I'm thinking particularly sheep. Yeah. If you've got a shepherd who's got sheep and one of the sheep is injured, do you know what that sheep will often do to the shepherd while the shepherd is trying to help the sheep? Bite him. Not because he hates the shepherd, but because he's in pain. In our brokenness, we hurt people. And so we have to be prepared as those who have been healed, who have been set right, and who have experienced that help, that hope, that healing, that as we try to take it to others, there will be bites along the way. Jesus says that there will be tribulation, there will be trouble, but he says this, be faithful, exactly what Jesus did, be faithful unto death, because you know what Jesus did? Philippians 2 tells us, it says, he was found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death. He was willing to even die to accomplish good for others, to serve others. And he says, if you do that, I will give you the crown of life. Now, do you remember what they said about those laurel crowns in Smyrna? These people would go to battle for this, or would be do great feats to be recognized with this crown of vegetation that would be put on their heads because it signified you're important. You've done great things. Jesus says, be faithful, and I will give you an eternal crown. These Samaritans would have, especially in their place of poverty and being slandered, they would have never expected to receive a crown in their community. But Jesus says, I will give you one that outlasts them all. That's what it means to follow Jesus, that we are given honor beyond anything we could ever earn because we share in his honor. He says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. If we follow Jesus in this, we will never be separated from his love. We'll never be separated from the loving community that he has built. We get to participate forever in the glory of what it means to be part of God's own family. That's what's being offered to us. Now, I love the fact that Jesus doesn't say, and if you follow me, everything will work out perfectly. If you have enough faith in me, you'll have nothing but riches and blessing and green lights when you drive down the road. That's not what he says. He says, you're going to suffer. I see you in your suffering, and I am with you in your suffering. That's what we get from the letter to Smyrna. It's one of the two letters where there is no condemnation of them whatsoever. He just says, I'm with you. I see what's going on, and I'm with you. So what questions do we ask ourselves? I'm trying to give us each week here things for us to think through, ponder through, and ask ourselves and each other. These challenges are easy to accomplish when you go and eat lunch. I'm trying to make it super simple for us to take this out of the room. At lunch today, ask that person sitting across from you. If you're going to lunch by yourself, ask the waiter. Just say, hey, sit down for a minute. I'll give you a bigger tip. I got 4 questions for you, okay? But here's what I want to suggest we ask ourselves. First of all, am I trusting Jesus with my suffering? Because so often I try to just deal with it on my own. I just kind of hold on to it, and yet I blame Jesus for not fixing it. I blame God for not just mystically intervening to this thing that I'm clutching deeply. Because maybe he wants to use your suffering. Not that he wants you to have suffering, but because you have suffering, maybe he wants to use it to be a blessing to others. If you want to see some of how that works, read chapter 1 of the book of 2 Corinthians, where it talks about that the suffering that we experience, this pain that we experience, can be used for good in the lives of others who are going through similar things. Okay, if you're in a place of grief right now, maybe difficult things have happened. We've started a grief support group. Gwen over here is in the corner. If you don't know Gwen, can you wave? Most likely, most people here know Gwen, but Gwen is helping run this group so that we can take the suffering and help see it turn for good. We're giving it over to Jesus and letting him redeem it for something beyond anything we could imagine. I want to ask this question, or we should ask ourselves this question: am I suffering for the right things? Here's the thing, I have suffered for the wrong things many times, okay? Have you guys found the new restaurant at the top of the hill? Used to be the hillside, I think. It's called Nara. Has anybody, Hilltop? Okay. Has anybody been there yet? We went there, okay? Because they had a special. They had a special. You could have all you can eat sushi and dumplings for $20. Okay, now, we went there for a good reason. We went there to celebrate. My son did some really cool stuff at school, so he wanted to do something special. We offered it, he said he wanted to do it. So we went for a good reason. And eating sushi, I think generally speaking, is a good idea. Sushi's tasty. Here's the problem. When you with your son try to tackle 15 orders of something, now they're not big plates, but still 15, as good as that was, I suffered for a stupid reason that night, okay? That was stupid suffering on my part. Now, that's a silly one, but it gets big. Oh, but by the way, their sushi is amazing. If you like sushi, you should check it out. They don't endorse anything. This is not a paid advertisement. I'm just letting you know. It's really good sushi. Just don't eat 15 orders. But in life, we have to recognize that sometimes my suffering is because I'm dumb. And if you weren't taught that, okay? I had the privilege of being taught by parents who let me know when I was being dumb, okay? Now, did I always listen? Sure, I always listened. I was the perfect kid. No, I didn't, okay? But I had parents who let me know when I was being dumb. And that's not a bad thing. Now, they didn't shame me with it. Don't hear that. And that's not what we're supposed to do. But we have to recognize that I do sometimes suffer for bad decisions. And I need to evaluate that, because that means I need to change in my behavior. But also, am I standing with those who suffer? This is one of the biggest, most powerful calls of the entirety of Scripture, that we stand with those who suffer. This is literally the biblical notion of justice. If you look through the course of the Old Testament all the way through the New, there's two basic kinds of justice. There is retributive justice, that's the justice we like. That's the bad guy getting the life sentence. You have to pay for it now. That's retributive justice. But the vast majority, something like 75% of all the times you see justice talked about in the Bible, it's what's called restorative justice. And it's applied often to people where you are being called upon to make whole someone else for whom you did nothing wrong. So it would be, say, the orphan and the widow, raise them up, serve them. You did not make them orphans, you did not make them widows, but you are called to lean into those who are suffering and help stand with them. That's biblical justice. That's what we're called to. Are you standing? Am I standing with those who suffer? And lastly, am I allowing others into my suffering? There's so many times I hide my suffering because I have grown fearful of the vulnerability that comes with allowing myself to be exposed. I will say things like, nobody knows the pain I feel. Nobody knows what I've been through. Nobody could really understand. And we say these things over and over and over, and we create a wall and we keep others out. But the call of Christ's community, the call of Grace Church, is to be a place where all suffering can be borne together, that no one needs to stand alone. This is why we push so hard into things like life groups and other small group opportunities, so that there can be community surrounding our suffering, so that there's a place to do that for others, to receive it for yourself. Don't be so arrogant to think that you, unlike Jesus, because when Jesus was suffering, do you know what he did? Disciples, please come with me. And then his disciples were boneheads and fell asleep, okay? But he still said, come with me, I need you. You are not stronger than Jesus. You are not more put together than Jesus. Allow others into your suffering. Stand with others in theirs. Make sure you're suffering for the right reasons and not the wrong ones. Ask these questions as you spend time together